A 15th century merchant's daughter's wedding list truly staggering quantities: 426 gallons of ale, 63 gallons of wine, and 24 gallons of mead for a guest list of 150 people. That works out to over 3 gallons per person across the 3-day celebration, a quantity that would put modern wedding open bars to shame. Wedding drinking served practical purposes beyond mere celebration. The public consumption of alcohol by both families symbolized their new alliance, with shared cups passed between the families as a ritual demonstration of unity. A wedding feast without abundant alcohol risked being interpreted as a slight against the other family or a sign of stinginess that might bring shame. One Lincolnshire family actually postponed their daughter's wedding by 6 months when a bad harvest threatened their ability to provide sufficient alcohol for guests, considering an inadequate celebration worse than delay. Noble feasts and banquets elevated drinking to spectacular excess. When one king hosted a Christmas feast in 1376, 378 pipes of wine were consumed, equivalent to nearly 48,000 gallons. Granted, this feast lasted 12 days and hosted thousands, but the quantities remain astonishing. The feast included designated wine pourers, whose sole job was to ensure no cup remained empty for more than a few minutes. At such events, the ability to consume vast quantities while maintaining composure became a valued social skill among the nobility. The physical layout of feast halls reflected the importance of drinking. Archaeological excavations of great halls consistently reveal elaborate drainage systems under the high table where noble guests sat. Not for spilled drinks, but to accommodate those too important to leave the table to relieve themselves. The feast continued uninterrupted as guests simply emptied their bladders where they sat, with servants occasionally refreshing the rush flooring. Medieval feasts clearly operated under different rules of etiquette than modern dinner parties. Religious festivals transformed sacred occasions into drinking opportunities. Despite modern assumptions about religious temperance, medieval church festivals featured alcohol as a central component. The Feast of St. Martin in November, marking the completion of the autumn wine harvest, featured the ritual opening of new wine barrels with blessing and considerable consumption. Religious institutions often produced special festival brews for particular celebrations. The Abbey at Ely created a special strong ale called Audley's End, exclusively for Easter celebrations, containing herbs believed to represent aspects of Christ's resurrection. These festival drinks weren't just alcoholic, but carried symbolic religious significance that blended spiritual and physical refreshment. The medieval mind saw no contradiction between religious devotion and enthusiastic drinking. The latter often enhanced the former. Harvest celebrations marked the year's most crucial agricultural triumph with appropriately epic drinking. After weeks of dawn-to-dusk labor bringing in crops, communities celebrated with specially brewed harvest ales using the first grains from the new harvest. Manorial records from across Europe document generous alcohol allowances during these celebrations, with even the stingiest lords providing abundant drink. One Sussex manor recorded providing each harvester with a harvest allowance of 2 gallons of strong ale for the celebration feast, significantly stronger than everyday drinking ale. The social importance of harvest celebrations appears in legal documents where courts often postponed hearings scheduled during harvest festivities. This official acknowledgement of community-wide intoxication demonstrates how deeply drinking culture was embedded in medieval agricultural rhythms. The harvest's success or failure determined survival for the coming year. Its celebration deserved exceptional drinking. Birth celebrations, particularly for noble children, featured elaborate drinking rituals. When a child was born to an aristocratic family, messengers delivered the news to allied households with a special drinking cup. Recipients were expected to drink the health of the new child and send the messenger back with the cup refilled. There were 23 such cups being sent out at a son's birth, with detailed accounting of which recipients sent return cups with especially fine wine or mead. These birth announcement drinks created bonds between families that might later translate into political alliances. Special occasion drinking created moments of joy and release in lives that were often challenging and constrained. The memories of these celebrations sustained communities through difficult times, giving people something to anticipate and later recall with pleasure. Beyond mere intoxication, These drinking traditions crafted shared experiences that defined what it meant to belong to a particular community in medieval times. These festive gatherings weren't just about passive consumption, it's about having fun. Medieval folks didn't just drink, they turned drinking into entertainment through games that would make modern partiers both impressed and terrified. These weren't simple drinking games, but elaborate social rituals that combined skills, status, and the universal joy of watching friends make fools of themselves. Casting the stone ranked among the most popular and potentially dangerous games. Players took turns lifting a heavy stone while holding a full cup in the other hand. Spill your drink or fail to lift the stone, and you face a drinking penalty. The cleverness lay in its self-defeating cycle. Each penalty made the next round harder. Numerous injuries from drop stones, including a 1,367 incident where a player accidentally dropped the stone on the local bailiff's foot, earning both a fine and several additional penalty drinks. King of the table crowned whoever demonstrated the greatest drinking capacity as temporary ruler of the festivities. This mock coronation granted the winner authority to assign drinks and tasks to other participants. A guild celebration describes a weaver being crowned king and promptly ordering all participants to drink left-handed while reciting saints' names. The game brilliantly inverted normal social hierarchies, allowing commoners to briefly enjoy the sensation of command. Drink and Dare functioned as a medieval version of Truth or Dare, with participants choosing between answering embarrassing questions, performing awkward tasks, or taking substantial drinking penalties for refusing both. There was a merchant who dared to kiss the tavern keeper's pig while wearing his best hat. His drunken attempt resulted in a destroyed hat, an angry pig, and a tavern brawl requiring town guards to resolve. Cross the River tested coordination with wet consequences. Players walked narrow planks laid across benches that became increasingly difficult to navigate as drinking progressed. Those who fell off faced both additional drinks and the indignity of being soaked in whatever filled the basins below. One monastery chronicle surprisingly mentions monks playing a version using prayer books as balance weights. Mumble the Peg combined drinking with knife-throwing skills. Players stuck knives into the table while reciting increasingly complex phrases. One town banned the game in 1422 after 3 serious injuries occurred in a single evening, noting that the combination of ale and sharp implements leads to bloodshed and complaint. These games weren't just mindless paths to intoxication, but served important social functions. They tested valuable medieval skills like strength, memory, and coordination while creating shared experiences that crossed social boundaries. They allowed controlled transgressions of normal behavior, creating safety valves for social tensions. Most importantly, they transformed ordinary drinking into memorable events, providing entertainment in lives that often lacked diversions. The creativity medieval people applied to their drinking games reveals a culture that valued clever competition and communal amusement. These games might have disappeared, but the human desire to combine drinking with competitive socializing continues uninterrupted to the present day. Yet for all the fun and games, medieval drinking wasn't without its darker side. All that medieval merriment inevitably led to some serious problems. The morning after a feast or festival often brought consequences ranging from simple hangovers to lasting social damage. Medieval society developed elaborate systems to manage alcohol's downsides while preserving its benefits, creating a complex relationship with drinking that balanced enjoyment against harm. Tavern brawls erupted with such regularity that they became a standard feature of medieval life. Court records from 14th century London show that nearly 40% of assault cases originated in drinking establishments. One particularly rowdy tavern called the Broken Sword appeared in court documents 26 times in a single year for fights, suggesting either terrible ale or an especially volatile clientele. The tavern eventually changed its name to the Broken Nose, which was either truth in advertising or a grim sense of humor about what happened to regular customers. Town councils took these problems seriously. Many implemented a curfew bell system, after which taverns had to stop serving alcohol. Oxford's famous Carfax bell rang at 9 in winter and 10 in summer, signaling that drinking establishments should close. Anyone caught drinking after hours faced fines, while tavern keepers who continued serving could lose their licenses. These measures weren't primarily moral judgments, but practical responses to the public safety issues alcohol created. Public drunkenness posed a significant challenge for medieval towns, often leading to accidents and fatalities. In Norwich, the need for special night watchmen during the 12 days of Christmas to assist those too intoxicated to navigate safely, preventing them from falling into ditches or fires. Such incidents were not rare. One English town documented 17 cases of drunken drownings over 5 years, as inebriated residents attempted to cross streams or rivers on their way home from taverns. Some cities created dedicated drunk tanks centuries before the modern term existed. London's Poultry Compter served as an overnight holding facility where intoxicated troublemakers sobered up before facing magistrates the next morning. Records show that during major festivals, these facilities filled to capacity, sometimes holding more than 60 individuals in spaces designed for 20. The city employed ale wardens specifically to patrol streets looking for dangerously intoxicated revelers and bring them to these facilities, medieval predecessors to modern public intoxication laws. Alcoholism existed long before the medical term was invented. Medieval society recognized the problem of drinking, using terms like ale-sick or wine-mad for those who couldn't control their consumption. Guild regulations often included provisions for members who wasted their substance on drink, with interventions ranging from financial guardianship to outright expulsion. These measures weren't merely moral judgments, but practical protections for families who might otherwise starve because of a breadwinner's drinking habit. One guild in Bristol implemented a 3 strikes policy for problem drinkers. First-time offenders received a warning, second offenses resulted in temporary suspension, while third violations led to the guild taking control of the member's finances for the protection of his household. The church maintained an awkward relationship with excessive drinking. While monasteries brewed some of the finest alcoholic beverages in Europe, church authorities periodically attempted to curb drinking's worst excesses. Bishops issued edicts limiting drinking hours or banning clergy from taverns, though enforcement proved spotty at best. One French bishop complained that his anti-drinking regulations were ignored because the priests who should enforce them are among the most enthusiastic patrons of the very taverns they are ordered to monitor. Medieval priests apparently took "do as I say, not as I do" to impressive new heights, pioneering the grand tradition of religious officials who couldn't quite practice what they preached after a few drinks. Medieval medicine gradually recognized alcohol's health consequences. Medical texts describe liver ailments linked to heavy wine consumption, with one 15th century physician noting that excessive drinkers developed yellow eyes and swollen bellies before their natural time. Medieval doctors might not have understood modern hepatology, but they certainly recognized when someone had been hitting the wine barrel a bit too enthusiastically. Their medical advice often boiled down to maybe drink less, which remains equally ignored by patients then and now. Despite these problems, medieval society never seriously considered prohibition. Instead, they developed a culture of moderation through social pressure rather than legal bans. Heavy drinking might be accepted during festivals, but those who regularly drank to excess faced social consequences ranging from mockery to formal sanctions. The community that drank together also regulated together, creating informal controls on truly destructive behavior while tolerating routine intoxication as part of normal life. This pragmatic approach contrasts sharply with later temperance movements that sought to eliminate alcohol entirely. Medieval society recognized alcohol's dangers but also its benefits, seeking a middle path that limited harm while preserving what they saw as essential functions of drinking culture. They accepted that perfect solutions were impossible, but that reasonable management could maintain a functional society despite alcohol's problems. Of course, no amount of social regulation could prevent the most universal consequence of all that drinking. The morning after a medieval feast must have been a sorry sight. Imagine dozens of formerly merry revelers now clutching their heads, shielding their eyes from the cruel morning sun, and swearing off ale forever, or at least until midday. Despite their regular alcohol consumption, medieval people weren't immune to hangovers. Their bodies processed alcohol exactly as ours do, and they suffered the same consequences for overindulgence. No amount of jousting experience prepared a knight for battle with the morning after dragon in his skull. Medieval medical texts provide vivid descriptions of hangover symptoms that feel all too familiar. A 12th century medical manual details sufferers experiencing heaviness of the head, great thirst, disturbed sleep, and aching in all limbs after excessive drinking. Another account describes eyes that feel as though they've been pierced with needles and a mouth drier than a saint's bones. These colorful complaints suggest that, despite centuries of experience, medieval drinkers endured hangovers just as miserable as those of today. Some modern myths suggest that because medieval people drank alcohol regularly from childhood, they developed supernatural tolerance. The evidence suggests otherwise. While daily consumption may have given them slightly higher baseline tolerance, medieval doctors documented plenty of severe hangover cases, treating 7 monks after a Saints' Day celebration, all suffering from what the recorder delicately called excessive celebration of the Holy Feast, but what we recognize as epic hangovers. What made medieval hangovers particularly brutal was the complete lack of modern pain relievers. There was no aspirin, no ibuprofen, not even reliable access to clean water for rehydration. Medieval sufferers had to rely on folk remedies of varying effectiveness, revealing both the impressive herbalism knowledge of the time and their desperate willingness to try anything to ease their misery. Some hangover cures were surprisingly effective. Willow bark tea, commonly prescribed for morning after woes, contains natural salicylates, the same compound found in aspirin. Honey water with ginger addressed both dehydration and nausea. These remedies had genuine medicinal value, even if medieval healers didn't understand the biochemistry behind them. Other cures ventured into truly bizarre territory. A popular English remedy involved raw eel mixed with bitter almonds and wrapped in cabbage leaves. This questionable concoction was supposed to be eaten immediately upon waking, which might have worked simply by making the hangover seem pleasant by comparison to eating raw eel first thing in the morning. Nothing says, "I'll never drink again," quite like choking down a slimy river snake before breakfast. The Roman physician Galen, whose teachings dominated medieval medicine, recommended pressing cold compresses to the head while drinking vinegar mixed with honey. The cold compress part makes reasonable sense, but vinegar on an already upset stomach shows a certain sadistic flair in medieval medicine. A German monastery book of remedies suggested smearing a paste of ground swallows' beaks and myrrh oil behind the ears, which almost certainly accomplished nothing beyond making the hungover person smell strange and giving everyone else something to laugh about. Humor does sometimes help a hangover, but probably not in this case. The monks who invented this cure must have been either still drunk from the night before or getting revenge on the novices who had to collect the bird beaks. One widely practiced remedy from French court circles involved rubbing a hard-boiled egg yolk on the forehead while reciting a specific prayer to Saint Bibiana, the patron saint of hangovers. Yes, there really was one. This remedy is often enough to suggest it had high-profile adherents, though whether they were cured by faith, placebo effect, or simply waiting long enough for the hangover to naturally subside remains an open question. The hair of the dog remedy, drinking more alcohol to ease a hangover, was already in use by the 13th century. A medical text from Oxford advised a morning cure of a small draught of the same wine that caused the suffering, mixed with raw egg and honey. While medieval drinkers didn't understand the science behind it, modern medicine explains why it works temporarily. By keeping blood alcohol levels elevated, it delays the worst symptoms. Of course, this only postponed the inevitable crash, something medieval drinkers likely learned the hard way. Widespread hangovers actually impacted medieval productivity enough to warrant official attention. After major feast days, many towns and manors operated a gentle day schedule, with reduced work expectations and later start times. The day after the harvest feast was designated for light duties only, as the workers will be of tender constitution following their celebrations. This practical accommodation suggests widespread recognition that mass hangovers were simply an expected part of community life after major festivities. Medieval literature often used hangovers for comedic effect, especially in tales of monks or clerics who preached temperance but failed to practice it. A 13th century poem tells of a monk who spoke mightily against the devil's brew at matins, but vespers sought it like a dying man seeks salvation. His morning after misery is described as a man whose soul wished to enter heaven while his body remained firmly in hell, a poetic depiction of hangover suffering that remains just as relatable today. For all their unusual remedies and lack of scientific understanding, Medieval people dealt with hangovers much as we do today, through a combination of folk wisdom, medicinal plants, and simply suffering through until time worked its healing magic. The universal experience of hangover misery created yet another bond across the centuries, proving that while drinking cultures may change, the human body's objection to alcohol excess remains stubbornly consistent. As brewing methods improved and new beverages appeared on the scene, medieval drinking culture gradually transformed. Medieval drinking habits didn't remain static across the 1,000-year span historians call the Middle Ages. What began as simple survival necessity gradually transformed into a complex cultural system, and by the end of the period, entirely new beverages began challenging alcohol's dominance in daily life. Early medieval drinking focused almost entirely on locally produced ale and beer, with wine reserved for the elite or regions where grapes grow easily. Production remained small-scale, with most communities relying on local brewers making small batches that spoiled quickly. Without standardized measurements or quality controls, early medieval drinkers played a perpetual guessing game with their beverages. One day's ale might be watery and weak, while the next batch could pack an unexpected punch that left the village collectively horizontal. Medieval ale tasting notes would have been less about hints of oak and cherry and more about probably won't cause immediate blindness. The introduction of hops transformed brewing practices by the 13th century. These bitter flowers provided both flavor and preservative qualities that extended beer's shelf life dramatically. Pre-hop ale lasted roughly 3 to 5 days before souring, while hopped beer remained drinkable for 2 to 3 months. This preservation breakthrough allowed for larger production facilities and wider distribution networks, gradually shifting brewing from household kitchens to dedicated commercial establishments. Brewing guilds emerged as beer production became more commercial, establishing quality standards and training requirements. Bremen's Brewing Guild, established in 1289, required a 3-year apprenticeship before someone could legally brew independently. Guild records show they conducted regular taste tests of members' products, finding those who produced substandard beer. One unfortunate brewer was fined the equivalent of 2 months' wages for beer described as tasting of old shoes and making the tongue shrivel, perhaps the earliest recorded beer review, and definitely not a favorable one. Wine culture underwent significant refinement during the later Middle Ages. Early medieval wine was typically consumed young, often within months of production. By the 15th century, aging practices became more sophisticated, with wealthy consumers specifically seeking older vintages. A ducal cellar inventory from 1487 proudly notes wines from 14 different years, with the oldest dating back 23 years, considered an extraordinary age for wine at that time. Distilled spirits gained popularity toward the end of the medieval period. Originally produced as medicinal compounds in monastery apothecaries, strong alcohol gradually escaped its medicinal confines to become recreational drinks in their own right. Early whiskey production in Scotland and Ireland began around the 15th century, with the first documented whiskey distillery license issued in 1494. The recipient, a monk named Brother John Core, received permission to produce 8 bowls of malt for whiskey, enough to make approximately 1,200 bottles by modern measures. The most revolutionary change came not from alcohol improvements, but from the arrival of new non-alcoholic competitors. Coffee reached Europe in the late medieval period, with the first European coffee house opening in Venice around 1647. These caffeinated drinks offered the novel experience of stimulation rather than sedation, creating entirely new social rituals built around alertness instead of relaxation. These new beverages gradually challenged alcohol's monopoly on safe hydration. Coffee and tea both required boiled water, making them naturally safer than untreated water without requiring fermentation. As one 17th century writer noted, coffee and tea shops now attract those who previously spent mornings in alehouses, with the notable difference that men leave with sharpened wits rather than dulled senses. This shift marked the beginning of the end for medieval-style all-day drinking culture. For the first time in history, people actually had to come up with excuses for their behavior rather than just blaming it on the ale. Many medieval drinking traditions persisted well beyond the Middle Ages, leaving fingerprints on modern drinking culture that remain visible today. From pub games to beer festivals, these ancient customs traveled through time to shape how we socialize, celebrate, and yes, still occasionally wake up regretting our choices the night before.